Today we'll be discussing the Netflix series Adolescence, and then we'll be discussing screens and teenagers. This is Doctor versus Comedian. I'm Dr. Asif Doja, and this is the Doctor of Laughs.
Not a real doctor.
Ali Hassan. Every episode I pick a topic for Ali from comedy and entertainment, and I question him about it. Then Ali picks a topic from medicine and health and grills me on that topic. Today we'll be discussing the Netflix series Adolescence, and then we'll be discussing the negative impact of screens on teenagers. Now, how are these related? Well, if you've seen Adolescence, you know screens, social media, has a lot to do with this series. Do you agree, Ellie? Why am
I do. I was waiting for a big word.
A question.
Waiting to do with this. I thought you were going to call it a phenomenon or this incredible...
This epidemic.
No, yeah. Well, no, I thought this epic series. Like it's really something. Right. I thought, and then you just went with the word series. So
this series.
I'm ready for you to juice up some of the language and make this a sexier conversation. I'm ready for that as well.
Well, stay tuned to see if that happens. It doesn't. Okay, let's get started talking about Adolescence. The little preview a couple of weeks ago, we talked a little bit about this series, but it's taken the world by storm. So I wanted to get your thoughts on it, especially because you have been involved in film and television production. You've written a film, you've starred in, I'm going to say countless movies, not because there's actually that many, but I just have never counted them.
It's because you have never counted them. Exactly.
You got the joke.
Also, I spend a lot of time with adolescents.
Oh, yes, you do. Your children, okay, everybody?
My children. I should clear that up. Listen, one thing I will say out of the gate, there will be spoilers. The spoilers start immediately and never stop. So if you haven't watched this, you should. Spoiler number one, which is a light spoiler, I think Asif and I would both recommend this show. That's not a spoiler because most of the people who've watched this show would recommend it. But yeah, now we're going to actually talk about it because it is worthy of discussion. And if you haven't seen it yet, I would say come back when you have.
Yeah. We have to discuss some of the plot points because otherwise, but I think going in blind, not knowing anything, I hardly knew anything about it when I watched it. It's definitely the best way to go into this.
Yeah, for the best. So get the hell out of here.
But then come back
and go watch the show and come right back. Yeah.
So, but listen, most people have probably seen it. Do you know why? It's the most popular UK Netflix title of all time. It has racked up over 114 million views. It's reached the top 10 in all 93 countries where they produce a top 10 for Netflix.
Oh, yeah.
It's the fourth most watched Netflix show of all time.
Crazy.
It is nuts. I think a lot has to do with people are obviously it's very well done. I think it's also the shortness of it. It's 4 episodes. I think it's also it hooks you in very quickly, like extremely quickly. And of course, as we'll talk about, it's all done in one shot. Every episode is done in one shot. So
I think there's a number of factors. I think the name as well.
Yeah.
Adolescents. I think adolescents are like, what are these loser adults saying about us? So they want to watch it. I think obviously people who are parents who have adolescents or people who work with adolescents, they're curious. People who once were adolescents. I think also the creator and lead, Stephen Graham, he's a bit of a phenom. I first saw him in Snatch, and of course he's in Peaky Blinders, a number of other things. He's a big deal in the UK, so fans of his would watch this. So yeah, there's a bit of a perfect storm of things happening in the show.
Can I tell you something embarrassing about Stephen Graham? I have seen him in Snatch, but I saw him most recently in the Venom movies. He plays a police officer in the Venom movies.
Oh.
I was watching it, and I'm like, yeah, man, what is Donnie Wahlberg doing in these Venom movies?
Wow.
And they do look similar, guys, okay?
I see it.
Pull up the pictures.
I can't even judge you.
But then, of course, I'm like, even in Venom, this guy's a really good actor, man, is doing American accent. I'm like,
yeah.
Oh, man. Then I realized it's Stephen Graham, who I'd seen in many things. So
how many things has he been in? And by the way, any idea how many things has he acted in? Take a guess.
22.
Why do I even do a podcast with you? 128. Come on.
Oh my God. Wow, so prolific. Anyway, spoiler, but when it comes time for the Emmy Awards, the Golden Globe Awards, this guy, you're going to be seeing Stephen Graham.
It's a miss if they're not talking about him, yeah.
You got to be talking about it. So let's just back up a second. We'll talk about the acting in a minute, but I guess what happened is Stephen Graham, pretty well known, an old actor friend of his named Philip Barattini, wanted to now branch into directing. So he called up Stephen Graham and said, will you star my first film? And Graham said, no, I won't. But he said, do your first film, and when you're ready to do your next one, I will do it with you. Which is fair, I guess. Barattini did a short film called Seconds Out, which is about a boxer who has some mental health issues. Showed it to Stephen Graham. Stephen Graham's like, yeah, that sounds good. I'll be in your next movie. So then the next movie he made was one called Boiling Point. I'd never heard about this movie until I was reading about Adolescence. So he sounds good. Okay, Graham's going to play a chef. It's going to be a single take as well. So done in real time. It's about the pressures that this chef is under. And basically on the verge of a nervous breakdown, continuous shot for 92 minutes. So basically that was kind of the start of Barattini's career. And then Plan B Films, which is a production company that you've probably seen, but people know it because it's Brad Pitt's production company.
Which, by the way, can we just, what a terrible, doesn't he have multiple children?
Oh my gosh.
Naming your production company after the...
I never even thought about that.
No, did you not? That's all I think about.
That's really funny. No, some of his kids are adopted, so I mean, I guess that's...
It's still a lot of children. I mean, come on, what are we doing here? Plan?
Yeah, okay, interesting. Okay, so basically they wanted them to do a TV show, which would be like 8 episodes, and then it would be a single shot. And so Stephen Graham and Barattini weren't too sure about this, but then Stephen Graham said it basically, if you read these interviews with him, he said this concept for Adolescence, he thought about it, and it just came to him fully formed. He had the idea. And he's like, because he wanted to talk about knife crime, which is kind of increasing in the UK. And then he wanted to talk about male violence towards women, but he had a couple of stipulations. So he recruited his co-writer, and he said he wanted to do it in the single shots that Barattini did. And he also didn't want to blame the parents, right, as for the actions of this adolescent. And then he said, okay, there'd be 4 episodes, and then each of them would tackle a different aspect of this crime, right? So one is a police procedural, one's a psychological thriller, one's a teen drama, and then a family melodrama. So I think I said those out of order, but...
Yeah, as you bring those things up, it's interesting to also, you know, we were talking about why this has been such a hit. Another reason possibly is that it got a little boost, inadvertent, from old Elon Musk, because on the subject of knife crime, this movie, people were like, oh, this is anti-white propaganda, because there was a black man who went into, I think it was a daycare and started stabbing people.
Yeah, I think it was a Taylor Swift dance class.
Oh, it was a Taylor Swift dance class. That's exactly what it was. It opened up a whole conversation about race and religion and violence. And they said, look at Stephen Graham. He is trying to ignore race. This is anti-white propaganda. Guess...
Oh, because the main character is white in Adolescence. Okay.
Yes. And you know why that holds 0 weight? Because that killing happened after this movie was filmed, after the show was filmed. So he's like, people have it all wrong. This was in the Hollywood Reporter article that we'll share with you. It was a great article. Very, very thorough. Yeah, the timing doesn't even. So some people were posting, this little corner of the internet was like, oh, it's this anti-white propaganda. And Elon Musk, as the Hollywood Reporter says, because of course, Elon Musk reposted it and put a wow of his own on it. So those kind of things give it fire, right? People will watch this movie, whether they think it's propaganda or not. So thanks, Elon. You made it the most popular. You helped in some way.
We'll link to a Guardian article as well that is actually written by the co-writer of it, who co-wrote the movie with Stephen Graham. This is Jack Thorne, who wrote this. And it's interesting because I guess as they were doing research into this incel culture, and whether it's social media websites or 4chan, what's that guy, Tate, Andrew Tate? Idiot.
What's that guy? Dude, I thought we were going to be mostly talking about Andrew Tate today. He deserves, I mean, I think, look, if you're talking about incels,
Yeah.
which if you're not aware, what a wonderful life you lead. Incels refers to involuntary celibates. It's a mixture of those two words. And it is young men who are not sexually active. It's not their choice. And they blame women for their lack of sexual experience. And listen, I know you don't want to talk about Andrew Tate because he is a despicable person, but this is very, very important. 1 in 6 boys in the age range of 6 to 15 will know of Andrew Tate and follow him in some way.
Wow.
The age range is 6 to 15 there. And then when you go to the age range of 13 to 15, it's 1 in 4 boys. And this is also what makes this series so compelling, because it's not like imagine if. This is happening.
Yeah, and I think this is why it's so resonant with people, because it is happening and it's quite frightening. But interestingly, Jack Thorne, who I was talking about before, was the co-writer. He was saying, when he was looking at this incel culture, there's this whole 80-20 rule, which is so ridiculous that 80% of women are only attracted to 20% of men. So it means the 80% of guys are just out of luck,
Yeah,
But his point was, this is what Jack Thorne says. He's like, if I was 12, 13, 14, I would read that and be like, yeah, that's true. That's why I don't get any dates. I mean, and so he's just saying, like, a younger person, the quote is in the Guardian article, the younger me would have sat up and nodded when they hear this stuff. So it's...
I don't know if you know about The Game. Are you familiar with the book, The Game?
It's actually, if you can see it, it's actually on this
that's hilarious
bookshelf behind me.
Okay.
And so why don't you talk about it? Okay, by the way, I read this book when I was, I can't believe I own it. But anyway, you might as well talk about it.
Yeah, I'm struggling with that as well. Now, I borrowed it from a friend. Haha, that's what I did. And that's a true story. I'm not sure if I ever gave it back. But I don't think it is a crime to own this book. The Game is written by Neil Strauss. Neil Strauss was best known as a Rolling Stone writer at the time.
He wrote the biography of Motley Crue. I think most people have read that or seen the movie.
The Dirt.
The Dirt. And he was a pretty well-respected writer.
Yeah. He penetrates this community, right? So the book is called, full name is The Game, Penetrating the Secret Society of Pickup Artists, or PUAs, I came to learn as I read. And you know what? I couldn't get past like page 100 of this. I really found this whole group of people and what they do. And a big part of what they do is make women feel bad about themselves so that women are now interested in them. So they're going to, hey, you got a pretty face, but I wouldn't wear open-toed shoes. Your feet are not good looking. Or the opposite. You got beautiful feet, love the open-toed shoes, but your face needs some work.
Yeah, I was explaining to someone the other day, actually. I'm like, yeah, that's called negging. They have terms for this.
That's
so
right.
The reason I found it interesting, that book, when I read it, was not because of the pickup artist philosophy, but how Strauss, he wanted just to be an outside observer, but he got sucked into the culture. And that's very interesting to me. This is what documentary filmmakers, nonfiction writers, they want to be removed from their subject, but you can't. And he just couldn't be removed. He was like in it. He became one of these pickup artists. So very interesting book to read. I don't know. I'll link you to an article which is called The Game at 10 Reflections from a Recovering Pickup Artist.
Yeah.
And Neil Strauss has some mixed thoughts on the legacy of that book. So anyway, I'll link to that. That's from The Atlantic.
I want to tell you something interesting as well. In our little chat here, Asif, I've sent you a link. In that link, it's a Wikipedia page of Neil Strauss. Tell me who Neil Strauss looks like to you.
Oh, he looks like your buddy Maz Jobrani.
No, he does not.
Dude, that's exactly who he looks like.
He looks like Andrew Tate.
Oh, he does look like Andrew Tate. But don't tell Maz Jobrani.
Oh my God. No, first of all, don't tell Maz Jobrani. That's awful.
He does look like Andrew Tate.
But also, don't tell Neil Strauss. That's how unbelievably unfortunate.
Very interesting.
That he resembles at a distance.
See, so Ali's brought this back around to what we're talking about.
That's what I do. That is what I do.
If it's okay, Ali, I'd like to pivot. So all we're saying is this is,
Yeah, the reason I brought up The Game is that is an introduction to incels.
Yeah.
That was deeply uncomfortable. And as you suggested, which is what I was going to get at, That was about 15, 17
Yeah.
years ago that I read
Yeah.
the book. Might have come out even before that. So this is a community that's had time to grow and thrive. Their version of thriving is, not what I would objectively call thriving.
It came out, this book, and they were all news group chats and stuff like that. But now social media has taken off, handheld devices and things like that. It's probably just increased, I don't follow this community or anything like that, but
it has increased.
So very timely in terms of this conversation, which again, as Ali said, that's probably why this is resonating with so many people. Let's talk a bit about the acting, Ali, in this.
Yes.
It's pretty good, I would say. What do you think?
To talk about the acting is one thing. It can exist on its own as incredible performances, but I think we cannot really talk about the acting and have the appreciation we should have for it without talking about how this show is filmed.
Okay, sure.
The way it's filmed is this one-shot thing that Asif mentioned with Baratini, I think, right? The director of Boiling Point. And you had suggested that you're interested in talking to me about this from a point of view as a guy who's done some acting. Numerous, uncountable works.
I mean,
I've had, he says. I can't explain, I was so impressed with The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Now, Marvelous Mrs. Maisel is not one shot, but there is a lot of unedited, lengthy things that are happening, lengthy scenes. And it is crazy, the choreography that is involved. Tony Shalhoub has talked about how much rehearsal time they have so that they can do an entire scene. And it's unbelievable. But this show is something else completely. And I want to see Boiling Point ASAP, because to do something like this in a kitchen is no joke. That is really no small feat. But anyway, getting back to Adolescence, the amount of rehearsal time, and what they did is they rehearsed for 3 weeks per episode. And they would do a rehearsal, just getting to know each other, getting to know the lines and the scenes for a week. Then they'd do a dress rehearsal with filming, no pressure, just filming stuff so they could be like, okay, this is how it's going to look. And then the 3rd week, they would do the tech. So understand that it never stops filming for the entire episode. Episodes are how long? 40 to 50 minutes?
Yeah.
Never stops filming. You start and then you go. And that means if somebody has to drive somewhere, you're in the car with them, you're getting out of the car with them. And then as they pass somewhere and go, you switch the camera and go here. And they talk about handing the camera off from one hand to somebody else's hand to take it upstairs because they can't fit up the stairs. I mean, the logistics behind this are incredible. Now, you might be asking, yeah, but why do that? Editing exists. And part of the reason to do it is to get people off their screens. Hey, take a look, raise your eyeballs, and take a look at what's happening here. And they made it in a way that it's very difficult to look away. It's a very, very compelling way of filming. And so, yeah, you're not multitasking. You're not on your phone at the same time. You're very engaged. Now, I would hate that we live in a world where everything has to be shot like this just to get people's attention. But given the subject matter, I thought it was so appropriate. I credit them so much for all the work they've done. And so now I can talk about the acting.
Okay. Wait, can I mention one more thing about the filming?
Unbelievable.
It ties into the acting.
Right.
You were saying on the last week, that's when they actually filmed the episode. I read that they do 2 run-throughs. They film it once in the morning, then they have lunch, and then they film it again.
Pre-lunch, post-lunch, yeah.
But some of these episodes are so intense. I'm like, I cannot believe you did the whole thing twice in one day.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. And of course, in episode 2, they use a drone shot. It starts in one place, it ends in another place. Again, the timing of that was unbelievable. But I guess the acting ties in a bit with that whole intensity of filming 2 of these full episodes in one day. I mean, when you're filming a scene, how long does it take to film one scene usually in a movie or TV show?
I mean, minutes, an hour, depending on the setup. It depends. I've done a hockey movie, so it's just everything has to be well coordinated on the ice, and sometimes out of the glass around the ice, you can see the reflection of the camera. So it has to all be, so that type of thing maybe takes a little longer, like a half a day setup. So it's shot well. So that's just one scene. Can take half a day. So for these guys to do all of this, I mean, it's unbelievable. Now, That's a sensational effort, and it's phenomenal, and it deserves all the respect and accolades it's getting. But then it's valuable to look up some of the interviews about Graham talking about this young kid. He is an unknown. He's never acted in anything. The guy playing the lead in this movie is a complete unknown actor.
Yeah, Owen Cooper, yeah.
Owen Cooper, and he is so sheepish about the interest he's gotten from all these people, including Robert De Niro and Steven Spielberg have been talking about him. It's quite phenomenal. And then also getting back to him as a young 15-year-old, he's thinking about how in school his mates are going to make fun of him for, various things that he did in the show. And he's just a young kid. He's very much the person he's playing, maybe a little bit older. But that also, you think about him, and then you think about how they filmed in a school, how they coordinate with over 100 students to be in the right place at the right time, as playing extras, complete background. I mean, I just shift back and forth to how many unbelievable, impressive things happen in this show. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, and the acting is amazing. Stephen Graham is so good, and the last scene is when I tell people this show, it's you use the word devastating because it is. That's what this show is, right? And the consequences of what happens in the first episode, they just linger throughout the whole series. It's unbelievable, but I shouldn't just say those two people. There is such great acting in this series. Everyone is superb. Yeah. It's really, I don't know what else to say. Yeah.
Flawless top to bottom, and a monumental effort to film this kind of thing. But wow, really, really paid off.
Overall, we both highly recommend this series. I do have one small nitpick that I want to ask you about, Ali, and see if you think I'm too crazy about this. This is definitely a spoiler. In the second episode, as Ali says, it takes place in a school because they're investigating the crime that occurred, and they're trying to find the murder weapon and a couple other things. So the police go to the school. When they're talking to the classes, the kids are on their phones, which I'm like, okay, that may be fine. Okay, maybe they don't have as strict rules in the UK about cell phones in the classroom, but then, the police officers are trying to talk to the students, and the students are like making jokes in the classroom. I'm like, I'm not sure, even if we're saying kids can be cruel and adolescents, teenagers, whatever, I'm not sure people will be making jokes if their classmate just died like a few days beforehand, and one of them has been arrested, and they all know that.
I disagree. And why? Because of how uncomfortable grief is. And we talked about this as we were in another episode. I don't remember which one, unfortunately, but I was talking about having seen Dear Evan Hansen. And Dear Evan Hansen was based on this idea of when somebody dies in high school, and both the creators of that play went to different high schools in different cities, but both of them had this same experience of like somebody dying in the class, and then watching how people in the school would be like, yeah, he was so great, he was so kind. And it's like, you didn't know him. You didn't know what? You wouldn't lower yourself to talk to this guy. He was our friend. You're trying to pretend like you had some, but this idea of shared grief.
Yeah, we did talk about this. Yeah.
Is such an interesting thing. We talked about this, but the same thing goes for not being mature enough to know how to process your emotions. When somebody dies, we know people our age who would just laugh out loud at a funeral. Nothing's funny. It's just, you don't know what you're feeling, and you're just going through these insane emotions. You don't know how to process them. So I think anything that happens when somebody dies is sort of like on the table. Like, you got to be like, okay. And that includes, we both had deaths of people in our family. Some people call immediately. They're great. Other people, they just disappear. And why? Because they just didn't know how to behave. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know what words to comfort somebody with. So yeah, I feel like anything's on the table with grief. So that I didn't bump up against that at all.
Ladies and gentlemen, the comedian making some insights about human nature to the doctor. I agree with you, Ali. I think you're right.
Speaking of some insights, guess what? Amazon initially rejected the show, and then Netflix took an interest. So if you have any issues with Amazon, and some people do, and I don't judge them for it, I'm behind you. It went to Netflix when Amazon said no. So you're sticking it to Amazon when you watch this show. All right, Asif, I'd love to start this discussion about social media with a piece of news that is very much in the news. This news is really in the news, and it's about social media, and it's about the country of Australia, who has decided to do something very interesting. I don't think anything has been put into place yet, but they've introduced a law, or they are about to introduce a law. You can tell me exactly what the language is around it, restricting social media from kids who are 16 and under.
Yeah, I read a bit about that. I think the law is in place now, but at the end of the year, they have to start enforcing it. The penalty for non-compliance for these platforms is up to 49.5 million Australian dollars.
They're not messing around.
Which I think is like 3 Canadian dollars. I'm just joking, Australia. Come on now. Yeah, it's a bit unclear how they're going to enforce this ban. But so other people are thinking about it. In fact, in the UK, again, because of adolescence, people are talking about this. Should we do a ban? And it's referenced in that Guardian article I was telling you about from the co-writer Thorne, who co-wrote Adolescence. So it is kind of interesting that that's bubbling up.
Another interesting thing in that Hollywood Reporter article, one of the people in that article, and I can't remember who it is exactly. I don't know if it was Stephen Graham or, they even have quotes from Keir Starmer. But somebody says Australia is a much more masculine city. I believe it's a country.
It is.
Is a much more masculine country than England is.
And so maybe they felt the need to address this ASAP.
Sure. And I think some people might immediately feel like a little bit of you might get some feelings about that. Like, how can you say that? Listen, man, the city of Montreal, you can't say right on red is allowed in Montreal. You just can't do it. People will die. Okay. You can't go red on lights. It's a different culture. People are built differently. They think differently. They behave differently. That's what's happening in Australia. It's just different behavior and different training.
Okay. Interesting analogy.
Absolutely. Well, because I know people who would be like, well, that's,
yeah.
They say, how can one country have more masculine people? Get with it. It's happening. And closer to home, not our home, but just south of us, Vivek Murthy, who is the Attorney General, no, not the Attorney, what's he called again? The
Surgeon General.
Surgeon General, for God's sake. He also had some massive concerns, right? He came out with a report last summer about social media. That's interesting. I don't think anybody thought 10 years ago the Surgeon General would be talking about social media.
Yeah, exactly. And he did come up with that. And then the report came out in 2023, but his health advisory was... He's saying that there should be a Surgeon General's warning label on all social media platforms. But the problem with that is that would require an act of Congress to implement. So pretty unlikely when you have Musk, Zuckerberg, and all these people having so much influence in the Oval Office. Anyway, putting that aside and putting aside the fact that we are still neighbors in the U.S., we're not part of the U.S. right now. So it is a different country where this is going on. But the advisory board for the Surgeon General, they did a review of the available evidence, and they said they were concerned about the amount of time adolescents spend on these platforms, the type of content they consume, and the degree to which social media will disrupt their health, like sleep and physical activity, and worrying about how it may affect those who might be predisposed to getting some of these negative thoughts, and of course, mental health. And so we could talk about that in terms of the pros and cons, the many cons of social media.
But let's also look at the verbs that you use there. I think that's important. You said you use the words they are worried, they are concerned, they may. You use the word may, which is not a verb. I don't know what that is, but it's the word may. You're not giving me any of that Doja evidence that you're so well known for. So what do we actually... An advisory board sounds like something that wouldn't have evidence maybe, but he's a Surgeon General. He's not just doing like, I got a bad vibe here. He's talking about stuff that's based on real studies, no? Or is that not what we're talking about?
Well, yes and no. So that's interesting. We can talk about that now. So there are things we know. We know that the brain develops between the ages of 10 through 19 and even continues in your early 20s to develop. So this is a key time for brain growth. We know that. We also know that that's from a brain structure kind of point of view, but from a emotional point of view and perceptions of self-worth, that's when they form personal identity form, so from more of a psychological viewpoint. So we know that those things occur, but what you're asking is there evidence that this is harmful, I guess? That's kind of what you're asking. Let's get to that in a minute, because it's probably worth just talking about in general the pros and cons of social media, as I mentioned.
I'll allow your stalling tactics, Asif.
Because it's not all negative. right? Despite what we had just kind of prefaced everything with.
Sure. I think we do forget about the benefits. And I think, yeah, why don't we remind people of the benefits of social media for young folks?
So it can sometimes provide a support. And I'll give you a good example from my work, right? A patient gets diagnosed with a relatively rare genetic disease, right? What's the first thing that the parents often do? Find a Facebook group for the disease and support. And it is support. And they'll come to me and be like, oh, Dr. Doja, there's only 8 kids with this diagnosis in the world, but we've all connected on Facebook, all the families. And they say they tried this medicine. Most of them did. Okay, well, that's great. You have more information than I do.
You should get on those support groups posing as a parent. Is that unethical by any chance?
I think it is. I don't think I would do that.
Okay, all right.
But, and it depends. People, you have to keep in mind, people post on social media for a reason, right? Sometimes because things are going really well. Sometimes because they're not going well. And you have to take everything people say with a grain of salt because it's only their experience. But it is quite useful. And the parents have brought me some really interesting things. So that's an example for adults with kids. But we can see how kids may need support, especially people who might be isolated, who lack social support in person. We know that during the pandemic, some kids actually did better online and not going to school because of bullying, loneliness. They actually might find an outlet. Another good example is people who are marginalized for whatever reason, but an example that's quite topical these days is people in the LGBTQ plus community who perhaps where you live, if it's south of where you and I live, they might live in a place where you can't even talk about this.
Sure. I mean, even east, west, and north of where we live, there are definitely communities where it just depends on who your neighbors are sometimes.
And to know that you're not alone out there, again, as you're saying, you live in a small town where nobody may be like you, whatever you want to say. Perhaps it's people who are racialized. It could be anything. But people who aren't like you, they have a long-term medical condition, so they can connect with people across the world, which is a pretty powerful tool. It also helps people, when I'm seeing a patient and they're going through a tough time with something, I usually say, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that to me. Ellie can't believe I'm empathetic here, but I am.
I'm stunned. Who is this?
I often say, I'm glad you brought that up. A lot of kids in their same situation or similar situation feel the same way and express the same concerns. The reason to say that is because you're not alone in this. You're not going through this alone. Other people have done this and have faced similar challenges. So you're not alone in feeling the way you feel. It doesn't diminish how they're feeling, obviously, but they're not alone. And that's another thing that can help. And when you have abilities to reach out for help online as well, through social media channels or to promote things like mental health, that might be helpful. So there is some potential benefit from social media. Would you agree with that, Ollie?
I would. What kind of monster would not agree with that? Absolutely. I can see that. But as we know, something that can be used for good can be used for bad as well. And it's just become, the concern of the day, or has become. It's not becoming. It's
right.
And as some of these articles say, it used to be rock music, and then it was video games, and then it was television, of course, and my mother's greatest concern, and then internet, and then social media, now AI. So I understand that these are all things that can be used for good or bad. Sometimes it feels a little bit like lip service, oh no, the video game helps him to develop dexterity and his eyes will move fast. It's good exercise for the thumbs. But I don't think any of this is lip service. I could see what you're saying.
Yeah. And so, it's worthwhile to talk about some of these potential harms. It can we'll talk about how it directly impacts mental health in a minute. That comes to that evidence question you were asking me about. But excessive social media use, excessive screen use, just like the kids who would watch TV all day and all night when we were growing up. So it will distract you from homework, exercise, family time, family activities, Could talk about the example that parents need to set in a little bit. Disrupt sleep. That's a huge thing, right? Kids on their phone all the time. When I tell kids everybody needs, once you're a teenager, you need 8 hours of sleep a night. And that is often, adults are often not getting that, and kids rarely get that, again, because they're on their phones. And so those will affect your mental health, right? If you're not exercising, that's been shown to decrease someone's mental health. Poor sleep, also related, right? So those things can be implicated with the social media. But then you get some of the more concerned things that are going on, because at least you and I, Ollie, to a certain extent, have lived a life without social media. And so we know when we're reading something on social media, like, that doesn't sound right. Let's go look up a couple of sources and see what we say. But that being exposed to biased or not correct, I mean, it does happen to adults all the time, but kids are even more at risk.
I was just about to interrupt you to say, like, have you met half this world who is sucking up all this misinformation and disinformation and saying, no, the other side is the one who's misinformed and being lied to? Yeah, it's a whole thing.
I mean, listen, it's a concern. And of course, there's cyberbullying, which goes on with social media. There's getting abnormal impressions, body image, right? You get distorted views of body image. We talked on a previous episode, you can check it out in our archives, about TikTok tics, how kids were manifesting tics that look like Tourette syndrome from seeing social media things. And then some concerning things, right? Like, what about online predators? Very concerning to us and our families.
So again, I heard you use the word potential harms. I want some evidence, bro. For the first time in the history of this podcast, I'm demanding some evidence from you.
Wow. Okay, good. So the evidence overall, it's a bit weak and maybe not as conclusive, but there is some evidence. Okay, so one study that looked at people who viewed social media posts about substance use or self-harm were at a greater risk of engaging in that behavior. So one of them was about binge drinking, right? So if they saw people binge drinking in social media, they were more likely to binge drink within the next year. Another big concern, and this is one of my wife's areas of specialization, is eating disorders. One study that looked at 50 studies across 17 countries. So this review of all this literature suggests that continuous online exposure to unattainable physical ideals creates this distorted body image, and that can, of course, lead to eating disorders. And again, we know that eating disorders increased over the pandemic. Again, less social interaction, people are not seeing people in person, and of course, increased social media use. There are a few other studies too as well. So one looked at, when Facebook first came out. Do you remember this back in the day, Ellie?
Of course I do, buddy. Greatest time of my life.
It was a really smart study. They looked at college campuses that had already rolled out Facebook and those that hadn't. And there was a more negative effect on mental health in the ones who had rolled out Facebook. And that was early in the 2000s. So there are some people who say that there's not a lot of evidence. One study looking at 72 countries showed that as social media was rolled out in various countries, they didn't see any effects in mental health. Other people have looked at brain studies and brain mapping studies and brain development to see heavy social media users versus other light social media users and people who don't use it. And there's no any drastic changes in their brain, the physical structure of their brain or their wiring of their brain. So what does this mean? It means that we certainly see that there's a correlation in a lot of these studies between poor mental health and social media use. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's causative, right? We don't know if the social media is causing it, or perhaps people who have anxiety, depression, etc., can be drawn to social media and they're not engaging their regular activities. So what do they fill it with is with social media. So I'll link to some articles from the New York Times and from Nature, which talk a bit about this.
Now, also, the thing is, I can appreciate what you're saying here, causation, correlation, but I think common sense has to factor in as well, right? If your child is spending an hour plus on social media, all I think about every day, I think about this thing that somebody said online saying to never forget that some incredibly smart people are being paid tons of money to keep you addicted to your phone.
Agreed.
And social media is part of that. It's not just the gambling apps. It's not just your step counter. Social media is a big part of that. And I know even at a man my age who, as you said, has lived in a world where we didn't have it, and therefore I should feel some level of objectivity. I don't. If I get on my phone immediately in the morning, it ruins my day in a sense that I'm constantly on my phone. And I notice, I'm like, why am I reaching for my phone incessantly? If I take an hour to reach for my phone, I don't turn it on right away. I just sort of, my day is different. It's noticeably different. And then I've read and heard studies talking about the importance of this. Don't go to your phone right away. I've experienced it myself. So I think if you go to your phone right away and it's social media, it's going to be terrible for you. I think the other thing is, my Instagram is basically horrifying images from Palestine, mobility exercises, and child psychologists. I don't know what happened, what algorithm I made. The comedians I follow are gone. The musicians I follow are gone. It's just those three things. So child psychologists seem to be saying over and over again, as soon as you let a phone go to the bedroom, your kid's bedroom, you've lost.
Interesting.
You've lost as a parent. You've lost against social media. So trust the child psychologists who've said that, and there's a bunch of them,
For sure. So let's talk about some suggestions for people, because I think people want some of these practical tips like you just gave.
Yes.
But listen, before we do that, just remember, there's a couple things can be true at the same time about social media, right?
Yes.
Even if I say there's no evidence that we have that is rewiring kids' brains or that is driving an epidemic of mental illness, there is an epidemic of mental illness. But social media might not be the cause. Just like I'm being very facetious here using, but you remember Dungeons and Dragons was like causing all these problems, when we were kids. My parents wanted to ban me for playing Dungeons and Dragons. That was the most I rebelled, is playing Dungeons and Dragons. But you can still say that, but given what you said in terms of the addictive nature of social media, there needs to be a way to reduce how much time people spend on them. And it has to be not just us as parents and on the kids. It has to be up to these manufacturers too. People have said this many times, that people will look back on the social media craze that's going on and will look at it like smoking was, oh my gosh, I can't believe pregnant women smoked. I can't believe we did all these things, right? Knowing how potentially harmful it is, right? There's no reason to think that smoking a cigarette is a good thing, right? We mentioned a few benefits of social media, but clearly there's many, many harms. Okay, so suggestions for Ali. You need to, first of all, determine the age your child will have access to social media. And the problem is there's no right age. But we do know that a lot of the platforms say you need to be 13, but some studies say up to 40% of children age 8 to 12 use social media. And that was in Vivek Murthy's report. So what the idea they suggest is there a right time or wrong time? Not really, but you should start the conversation early. What I do not suggest people do is say absolutely no social media and no phones till you're 18. The reason I don't suggest that to anyone is because you have an opportunity now. And Ali knows, he has teenagers. There gets to be a certain point where you've done your parenting. You know what I mean? Like, they're an independent person. Now they're going to make their own decisions. So your opportunity to intervene is early. So this is when you can start having conversations about social media and talk. Like, yeah, I always like to give examples. Sometimes they're true, sometimes they're not. This person gets so addicted to their phone or to these online games or whatever it is that it causes these consequences. Oh my gosh, did you hear about this person who was like sexting a picture to somebody and then it got all over, the school or work or something like that? These don't have to be true stories, but you tell these stories, you tell them at a young age, younger than you think that they even have to hear about this, right?
Do you ever end those stories with, and that person was me, your father?
I don't.
No, that'd be weird.
I think that's important. I think, this is my personal opinion, you can slowly introduce apps. Facebook has a messenger for kids when they're younger, like 8 or so. You can start with that and then slowly work them. And some things we're just like, TikTok, you're not watching that, Some people say you can buy a dumb phone. Have you ever heard of this, a dumb phone? It's like a cell phone which doesn't have these other things. Yeah. So you can do that. Some people do that with Apple Watch, but it's kind of expensive, guys, to buy your preteen and Apple Watch. But the second thing is what you said, Ali, keep devices out of the bedroom. We've had experiences with that, and the kids are clearly spending too much time on it, and people can monitor their use of kids. Most phones will have an ability to monitor that. We're like, no, plug it in the hallway, and that's it. They're like, oh, I need it for the alarm. I'm like, okay, well, I literally bought the digital alarm clock from Walmart.
Oldest excuse in the book, need it for my alarm. Ironically, you ignore your phone alarm most of the time anyway. We're the ones who have to wake you up. So it's not really working anyway.
Exactly. Don't pretend. Yeah. The key, by the way, so this is why I tell kids who are having difficulty sleeping, because we see that a lot in neurology clinic. First thing is phones outside. The second thing is, if you have a clock, you need an alarm clock, you need it set, put it across the room. So you must get up to go get it. So if you're pressing snooze, you're already up. So now get ready. And some people who have a hard time falling asleep because they're looking at the clock all the time. Oh, it's like 11 o'clock, I haven't fallen asleep. Then turn the clock around. So you can't actually see the time, but the alarm will go off. Little tips and tricks, guys.
The old turn it around trick.
But it's important because, again, from that Surgeon General's report, a third of adolescents use their screen until midnight or later. If you have to get up in the morning, you're not getting 8 hours of sleep, right? Third thing is just make sure, as I talked about, you're talking to your kids about these things. And so just like you watch television with your kids and then, you could talk to them about what you're seeing on TV, especially with something that may be objectionable, controversial, you can talk to them about it. That's okay. You should do the same thing about social media. And you're normalizing that you can have a conversation about what they see. Again, doing this younger is better. You could turn on privacy settings so they don't end up sharing their information with others. Early on, especially, you should become their friend on the account and monitor their account, especially when they're starting to do it. Eventually, listen, they're going to figure out ways around that. So, lots of kids will have 2 accounts and things like that. Eventually you can't do that. But again, you start this younger than you think you have to. But 2 things, Ali. 3 things. 3 last things. One is to encourage face-to-face contact with friends. Very important, even with kids who are prone to social anxiety. So I see a lot of kids, again, indirectly for other reasons, who have social anxiety. And the parents are like, yeah, so you know what we're going to do? Online school only. They'll have friends through social media. Perfect. You haven't actually solved the issue, which is going out in public is the stressor. Face-to-face contact with friends, so younger kids arranging play dates, going to the park, and of course, sports or extracurricular activities. It doesn't have to be sports. It can be band, it can be Girl Guides, Boy Scouts, things like that. There's ways to encourage that.
My 2 sons have 2 brothers who are their friends. So the 2 younger are the same age, the 2 older are the same age. And the 4 of them are like, can we go to the park? Great. Couldn't be happier. All 4 of them are going to go and be active. And the older brother of the other family plays like some very competitive hockey. My older son plays soccer and loves it. I'm like, anyway, drive by the park to go see them, to tell them the 2 older ones are curled up in basically a question mark shape on a phone, watching something on the phone. I was like, I will kill you both. They're like, no, we literally just got off the phone. I was like, the young 2 brothers that you have, they're about to snitch to me and tell me what's really
And so you took the phone and threw it down the sewer. Excellent.
Sure did.
But okay, the last 2 things, and these are the most important things. I think we always say, do what I say, not what I do, right? But that's like a pretty poor parenting strategy. So can you follow the rules yourself?
Yeah.
Do you, again, as Ali said, check your phone first thing in the morning? Do you like, yeah, I really got to go to bed, and then you spend a half hour scrolling through garbage on your phone, right? Do you do that? If so, maybe stop doing that. Maybe put that away, read a book, right? Before bed. Yeah. I think a lot of us do that. What about at dinner? Dinner should be all phones put away. That's work, actually. So just hang on a second. Do you say that as an adult? I do. So I don't know if Ollie does, but that happens sometimes. So can you put it away for that period of time? Or, somebody brings up something. Oh, yeah, let's go look that up. Or just wait. The knowledge is not going to change in 15 minutes about whether Kevin Costner played Boba Fett in Empire Strikes Back.
What? Did he?
No, he didn't, but that was an urban myth when we were kids.
Okay.
And we had no way of knowing back then.
I leave the podcast and start looking it up.
We had no way of knowing back then. Now we can find out pretty quickly. The last thing is, the most important thing is what we've established. There is a mental health crisis in the world, right? Definitely North America, but really the world. And there's many multifactorial reasons for this to be occurring. But it needs to be improved, and governments need to put in money to help support people with their mental health. We can do what we can as individuals to help support our own mental health, whether it's going off screens, getting exercise, getting good sleep, as Ali's talked about in the podcast, mindfulness, anything that can help your mental health. But really, we need more resources for people because it's such an epidemic. So, yeah, there you go. Those are the suggestions.
I like it. I like what you said. I do also feel like I always have to add this. I think parents are scared to tell their kids to be on their phone less, or I don't want to say that, it'll upset. Stop being a goddamn loser, all right? You're a parent at the end of the day. And if you care about your child's well-being. I think some parents are worried about losing maybe the friendship that they have or something like that. You know, they have a positive. I think finding a balance is important. I think it's like, listen, I've done the research. I've talked to enough people in positions you haven't. This is what I know is good for you. So this is why your phone will not be joining you in the bedroom. Or this is why we're going to somebody's house and you will not be taking your phone to somebody's house. How many times have I gone to people's houses and the kids are just on their phone? No, hey, how are you? No, hello. I mean, I struggle with that. And that's a lot of the parents being like, I know, but I can't tell them to get off. Why? Why can't you? What happened to manners? What happened to getting up and seeing? What happened to going outside and playing? What happened to all that stuff?
One thing that I've learned, not just with my kids, but through work as well, kids actually want you to set limits. That's actually what they want to do. They don't want free reign to just do whatever they want.
I love that.
They need these limits and they test limits. That's what you do. They're kind of like edging out into the world and testing that a little bit. Okay, they come back. Okay, that was too much. My dad yelled at me. Okay, let's back off a little bit. But they're always doing that. But they need you to set the limit. If there's no limits, what do they're just like, oh, I'm going to go for a drive. But you're only 15. Okay, well, you know what? They're almost 16. So I'd rather buy them alcohol than, then just go get it or ask somebody outside the beer store. I'm like, or no, that's another option, right? You could just say no.
Remember, no.
So, okay. Yeah. Well, that's enough editorializing from us for this section. That's our episode for today. Let us know what you guys thought. Very curious about your thoughts about adolescence and then the whole teens and screens, as my kids call it. They make a joke, screenagers, but I think everybody's heard that joke before. So let us know what you guys thought. Again, we focused a bit more on some of the consequences, mental health and otherwise, and what the evidence shows, but there's certainly more topics we could address in the future. drvcomedian@gmail.com, Dr. V Comedian on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky. We're everywhere. YouTube. Check us out on YouTube as well.
Oh my God, we really are everywhere.
We have these shorts that come out. Usually we have a couple a week. And then we also have some stuff in the pipeline for us. But one thing I want to ask people, I just found this out the other day. It's very important if you're listening to this, but you're like, yeah, I haven't downloaded something recently, one of the episodes, just make sure you're downloading every once in a while. Even if it's one that you don't get a chance to listen to, you're like, I'll put that on the back burner or listen to it on my next trip. Just download it. It helps with the algorithm. So just please do that. But we do have some exciting developments coming in the next few months, which we will talk to you about. Ali, what do you got going on for April?
Bro, I'm here. I'm there. I'm everywhere. That's not exactly true. I'll be in Winnipeg at the end of the month. I will be, just doing some comedy in the city of Toronto. Standupali.com is where all that information will be.
But before we go, just remember that although I'm a doctor, I'm not your doctor. Medical issues we talk about are for your interest and information only, and they're not medical advice. Please consult your medical professionals for actual medical advice. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.